Last night, we saw the first of the two-man presidential debates between Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders. And just when I thought they couldn't get any crazier, they both doubled down on their no deportation, open borders policies. Now, of course, the people on the left are going to argue it's not really open borders because they want certain restrictions, yada, yada. But Bernie Sanders has called for breaking up customs and border protection. Joe Biden yesterday went as far as to say no one will be deported, and even said under any circumstances, none of these people will be held accountable. When asked about people seeking treatment for coronavirus, he said under any circumstances, they will not be held accountable. It's a bold way to say that you think they've done something wrong and you will do nothing about it. Now, what I find particularly offensive about the statements made by these people is that as of today, the governor of New Jersey has announced strict controls. Businesses will be closed. Public gatherings over 50 persons will be canceled. And they are strongly discouraging me and many other people, the 9 million in New Jersey, not to leave their homes after 8 p.m. Why should we sacrifice and be put under these restrictions for the betterment of our communities if these presidential candidates would then say that they would go so far as to not deport anybody who crosses into our country and puts us at risk? Right now, we are seeing numerous countries enact harsh border controls, shutting down their borders. The European Union's doing it. Germany is doing it within the EU. Guatemala has banned U.S. persons from entering their country. Yet Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders have the nerve in the midst of a global pandemic and crisis to say they will not hold these people accountable, nor will they deport anyone. Joe Biden said, unless they commit certain felonies. That, to me, is shocking, insane, and deeply offensive to all of the people in the U.S. who are taking this crisis seriously. Let me explain. As the European Union is seeking to shut its borders to people coming in, even within their borders, Germany is doing so in an extremely drastic measure that some people are saying shows the end of globalization. Yet because Bernie and Biden are trapped in the echo chamber bubble, they're not paying attention to how serious this crisis is, which I find alarming considering they moved the debate to D.C. and had no audience because of the fears of the coronavirus. Many people have brought up the merits of immigration controls for economic reasons. Well, the economy is taking a major hit right now. You want to argue that? Fine. We can argue the merits, either pro or con, in terms of illegal immigration. But right now, around the world, borders are being shut to stop the flow of a deadly disease. And during this crisis, with all ramifications, Biden and Bernie would say, nah, we're good. We're going to allow people to enter the country and not deport them. To me, that is absolutely insane. Let's read these stories, starting with this one from the Washington Times. Before we do, head over to timcast.com/donate if you'd like to support my work. There are several ways you can give. The best thing you can do, share this video. There's a lot of information I'm going to be presenting right now about the coronavirus. Admittedly, this is strongly political, so I know a lot of people might not want to hear it, but sharing still does help. And for those that haven't subscribed, if you like this content and want more, make sure you do subscribe and hit that notification bell because YouTube isn't recommending my content and Google has actually removed this channel from search entirely. So if you want to make sure you get it, please consider subscribing and hitting the bell. The Washington Times reports, quote, "No one will be deported. Biden vows to freeze key aspects of immigration enforcement." Democrats' top two presidential candidates declared Sunday that they will halt key aspects of immigration enforcement as soon as they take the White House and promise to work to legalize most of those here illegally. Former Vice President Biden affirmed his plan for a 100-day halt to all deportations. No one will be deported at all, he said. After the 100-day period, he said he would only deport those with felonies on their record, effectively carving almost all illegal immigrants out of danger of deportation. Mr. Biden also refuted the Obama administration's policy of cracking down on sanctuary cities, saying flatly that he would not ask local authorities to cooperate with U.S. immigration and customs enforcement. Mr. Sanders, meanwhile, said he would stop raids by ICE, apparently referring to the at-large arrest the agency says it has to make, particularly in sanctuary communities where local prisons and jails refuse to help in arresting criminals. Both Mr. Biden and Mr. Sanders insisted their plans don't mean open borders. Let's talk about open borders for a second. What does open borders really mean? Well, several months ago, about a year ago, Some pundits on the left said open borders would imply that you could freely enter the country and no one would do anything about it. No, they're not proposing open borders. That's totally different. Then Bernie Sanders issued his plan saying he wanted to break up customs and border protection. Ocasio-Cortez reaffirmed this at one of their rallies and encouraged attendees not to cooperate with federal law enforcement. If you are breaking up the guard agencies for our borders, if you are stopping the raids from federal law enforcement, if you're saying you will refuse to deport people, you are just talking about open borders with extra steps. As of right now, with the coronavirus affecting us this way, I think that is deeply irresponsible. The Washington Times also reports Democrats, illegal immigrants seeking coronavirus treatment should not face deportation. Now, I will admit, there is an interesting conundrum here. We want people to seek treatment because we don't want them spreading the virus. And if they don't get tested and don't go to the hospital, that may be the case. Unfortunately, you must be held accountable if you break the law. If people are bringing diseases into this country, I'm not saying they are necessarily, then we should probably deport them. If people are coming into this country at a time when we're supposed to be locking things down, they should be held accountable. And I'm sorry, there's a hard decision to be made here because we do want them to go to the hospital if they're sick to prevent the spread. But they still must be held accountable for breaking the law. The Washington Times says, Vice President Biden said Sunday that illegal immigrants who show up for coronavirus treatment will be held harmless. There are certain things you cannot report an undocumented alien for, an undocumented person for. They will not, should not, under any circumstances, be held accountable. That was a bold misstatement, if you were to ask me, because my only assumption is that Biden was trying to specifically refer to the coronavirus, certain circumstances. Unfortunately, he said under any circumstances. Now, whether or not they actually plan to implement policies where they just let people come in and do whatever they want, I don't know if that's serious. This may just be extreme pandering, but it should not be happening right now. And Bernie Sanders went further to say these people would get access to our government-funded healthcare, which we can't afford to begin with. Mr. Sanders said his Medicare for All health plan would guarantee illegal immigrants get healthcare so they could show up at clinics for testing and care. And he said he would halt at-large immigration enforcement altogether so illegal immigrants wouldn't be afraid to show up. U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement has already said hospitals and clinics are considered sensitive locations where arrests cannot happen except in exceptional circumstances. There you go. That's enough. To tell people that they won't be held accountable and that you won't deport them is extreme, in my opinion, and I think in the opinion of many Americans. But combine that with what's going on right now with the coronavirus, and it is beyond extreme. It is psychotic. Let me show you some stories. First, I want to iterate that this is not just about coronavirus testing. Joe Biden's campaign reversed and said he is supporting a moratorium on deportations from February 22nd. Joe Biden has, along with Bernie Sanders, they have both said they will not be deporting people. This is not a new position. They have consistently held this position. You would have thought that in the midst of this market hit, this major market drop, as well as the closing of all these borders around the world, they might change their tune. But they can't. They've sold themselves down this road, and it would look strange, and it would look like a flip-flop if they decided to change their minds. Although I think you can do it, well by simply saying, as much as we want to protect people, we must recognize that in the midst of a global crisis, people cannot enter this country illegally. We are controlling our borders for a reason, and they will be held accountable. This is a story from a couple days ago, the New York Post. U.S.-Mexico border could be shut down to contain coronavirus officials. There are two potentials here. The Mexican government said they would consider closing things down, but we're not, it's a suggestion so far. Nothing hard has happened, but Trump has also made similar comments. Keep that in mind. Nothing has really moved here, but the conversation is occurring. However, Guatemala has banned arrivals from the U.S. and Canada to fight the coronavirus. How could it be that Guatemala, of all countries, is saying, Americans, you cannot come here. Yet meanwhile, in America, Biden is saying, if you come, we will do nothing. We will hold you harmless. Bernie is saying more than that. We'll actually give you health care. So what happens if someone in Mexico and Guatemala actually gets the coronavirus and they're being told right now by Democrats, come on in, we got free health care for you. Nothing will happen. To me, that is insane. Over in Europe, this is breaking news 2 hours ago. The European Union will ban all non-essential travel into Europe for 30 days to slow the spread of the coronavirus. I think at this point we are seeing there is a real and significant reason why we have border controls. And look, I'll tell you something else as a segue. Donald Trump has been warning us about China for a long time. Again, I will stress to those that hate him, you can hate him, but you have to admit he was right about the problems we are facing because of China. Bernie Sanders said something similar, that it was a threat to our national security and that these trade agreements were a disaster. And it's something he said in the past as well about these free trade agreements. Right now, our medicine is produced in China. A lot of our masks and medical supplies are produced in China as well. And in September of last year, Trump ordered U.S. firms to get out. And now here we are. The virus originated in Wuhan. It's now spread around the world, and we don't control our own flow of resources. That was a major mistake. We need to be self-reliant. Trump was right about that. And we need strong border protections. Trump was also right about that. The United States lets in some of the largest numbers of immigrants for any other country in the world. And right now, the European Union is going to be shutting down its borders. Check this out. The European Union will restrict all non-essential travel into the region for at least 30 days. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen announced on Monday. Only essential travel will be allowed for at least a month once the plan is approved by European leaders. The less travel, the more we can contain the virus. I propose to the heads of state and government to introduce temporary restrictions on non-essential travel to the European Union. She said in a press conference, "We think non-essential travel should be reduced right now in order not to spread the virus further, be it within the European Union or by leaving the European Union, but also to avoid non-essential travels not to have more potential strain on our healthcare system." Members of the Schengen travel area, including the non-EU members Iceland, Liechtenstein, Norway, and Switzerland, will not be affected by the rules. The United Kingdom, which left the EU in January but remains in a transition period with the bloc, will also be exempt. Under the plan, visitors from non-EU states will not be allowed to enter the region unless they are long-term residents of the EU, family members of EU nationals, diplomats, cross-border commuters, or essential workers like doctors, nurses, and researchers, von der Leyen said. The transport of goods will also be exempt from other restrictions. Now, what's really shocking in this regard is that within the Schengen area, it's supposed to function kind of like states in the U.S. There's no checkpoints in between New York and New Jersey. It's just you pay a toll depending on which direction you're going, but you can drive in and out with no problem. The same is true for much of the Schengen area. But now Germany is sealing its border. So I know it's not a complete, a perfect comparison. But imagine if your state shut down all the roads into and out of the state because of the coronavirus. That's something beyond just national borders. Within reason. I know the EU is very different, right? They have the EU Schengen borders as well as their national borders. Germany seals off borders as European countries report record jump in coronavirus deaths. And this is from as well just today. Germany is the latest European country to seal off its borders in an effort to contain the coronavirus outbreak as the number of deaths in Europe jumped overnight. As of Monday morning, Germany had shut its borders with Austria, Switzerland, France, Luxembourg, and Denmark. Only German citizens, those who reside in the country and work in a neighboring nation and vice versa, and physical goods can cross the German border. Though Berlin is not the first European capital to impose border restrictions, the move marked a U-turn in Chancellor Angela Merkel's policy. It's a crisis situation. Friedrich Heinemann, head of public finance for German-based think tank ZEW, told CNBC. He said there's a competition between politicians to show leadership. Nobody wants to risk showing that it is less cautious about the outbreak. He said, at the height of Europe's migration crisis in 2015, Merkel defended an open border policy. Speaking Wednesday, the German chancellor called on all European countries to coordinate their approaches rather than take unilateral actions. Germany has a total of 5,813 confirmed cases of coronavirus and 13 deaths. Data from Johns Hopkins University showed Monday morning Italy, Spain, and France experienced the highest daily jump in the number of coronavirus-related deaths Sunday. The latest deaths brought their respective totals to 1,089, 292, and 127. So Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders have said several times they will not be deporting people, and it sounds like they aren't taking our border protection seriously. Let me now show you why we absolutely must take this very, very seriously. CNBC reported on March 11th, up to 150 million Americans are expected to contract the coronavirus, congressional doctor says. Scrolling down, we can see they say, infectious disease experts say the virus so far appears to be deadlier and more contagious than the seasonal flu, with many experts and U.S. health officials saying the mortality rate is likely somewhere around 1%, making it at least 10 times as lethal as the flu. Mark Lipsitch, a professor of epidemiology at Harvard, said earlier this month he thinks about 40% to 70% of the world's population could become infected with the virus, and of those, 1% will die. The New York Times has created a calculator to show you what this really means compared to other illnesses and why we are taking such drastic measures, including strong border controls. Right now, we can see in the calculator with a 1% infection rate and a 0.1% fatality rate. This doesn't even appear on the chart of causes of death in the U.S. But they said 40 to 70% and 1% will die. Let's bring the fatality rate on the New York Times calculator to 1%, and we will bring the infection rate to 40%. At that low estimate, we can see that the coronavirus becomes the number one cause of U.S. deaths with 1.27 dead. But they also said it could be up to 70. So let's take a look at the worst case scenario. A 70% infection rate with 1% mortality puts us to 2.2 million dead, well above the previous number one contributor to U.S. death or cause of U.S. deaths, heart disease. But if the fatality rate reaches 3%, and in Italy it's 6%, and in some parts, in global estimates around 3.4%, then we can see that we are looking at just about 7 million dead in the United States. There are reasons why we are taking this so seriously. So I'll tell you why I find this to be particularly egregious. Right now, this message from Governor Phil Murphy of New Jersey, it went out earlier today at 11:46 a.m. There are going to be drastic measures taken to stop the spread of the coronavirus in New Jersey. Now, it's affecting, to an extent, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, New York, Connecticut, many other states, Los Angeles. Detroit is also preparing these harsh measures. Here's what they say. To slow the spread of COVID-19, I'm ordering, Governor Phil Murphy says, the closure of all pre-kindergarten and K through 12 schools beginning 3/18. The closure of all casinos, racetracks, theaters, and gyms. The closure of all non-essential retail, recreational, and entertainment businesses after 8 p.m. and the banning of gatherings of 50% or more. They have instituted what they are calling a curfew statewide, though they haven't said anything about how it's going to be enforced. I did contact local police who said they have been advised of nothing. They are so far saying it is strongly discouraged that you leave your home. I don't think they could necessarily enforce this. I don't know if it's constitutional to tell people you can't leave your houses. But this is what's happening where I live. I'm sure where you live, you are experiencing something similar. Recently, there was a man in Tennessee who he bought up tons of hand sanitizer and disinfecting wipes. And my understanding is the attorney general of the state assisted him in donating all of those goods. The New York Times ran a story about him, and this guy got roasted hard for trying to price gouge on important, disinfectants and hand sanitizers. So it's not just New Jersey, but it also is, as I mentioned, Detroit and many other places are going to be enacting harsh quarantines. I just want to say personally, my opinion is, if I'm going to do my best to help my community, and that means sacrifice, it means I won't go out and party, I won't go out to bars, not like I do anyway. I mean, I do a podcast at night for now. But if it is expected of many people, of everyone who lives here to do their part, I think it's particularly offensive if you're going to then argue that people who come here who aren't part of our community and then try and get access to our resources or potentially put us at risk. I find that deeply, I don't know what the right word necessarily is, but it sounds like they just don't care about us. It sounds like they would rather pander to an activist base to say what they think they need to say to get elected, just so that they could get the keys to the castle. And what they would do once they get into power, I honestly have no idea. There's been a lot of speculation about what comes next. Bernie Sanders hints Tuesday's primaries should be postponed over the coronavirus. And I have to say at this point, with as serious as a lockdown as we're facing, I don't see how we can continue the primaries. And this is where things start to get really, really scary. I'll admit, I am a little bit worried when they announced they're strongly discouraging people from leaving their homes after 8 p.m. where I live. I'm also worried that other people might freak out because of this, and I think it was a serious mistake. We're not necessarily seeing the same level of action taken from New York and Connecticut and other parts of this country. They're just shutting down businesses. But here we are. The government is ordering businesses to shut down. I wouldn't call it martial law like many people are actually saying. It's not a military takeover, but these are drastic measures. When I said in the past that I thought it can get bad, this is bad. The economy took a major hit. This morning opened up to one of the biggest drops in history. So it is particularly inappropriate for Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden to be speaking about our borders and immigration the way they are right now. As things continually get worse, we should be focusing on how we as a country come together. What's really interesting is the argument that's emerged is that this is the end of globalization. I don't know if that's true or fair. It's just a thought, but I've brought it up, in the past month, that because of the factories being shut down, because of, Trump and many other businesses now trying to set up factories and manufacturing in the US, because of border closures, globalization has taken a major hit. And even Bernie Sanders has called this out, of all people. So I can criticize them for their immigration stances. I do find it a bit, contradictory that Bernie would lament globalization and how it's hurt our manufacturing base, but then go on to say that people who are not citizens will not be deported, will not be arrested, and they will get access to our healthcare. You can't have it both ways, buddy. But from the Washington Examiner, they say, the coronavirus didn't mark the end of globalization. It accelerated a malign trend that was already underway. Yes, the European travel ban is a peculiar Trumpian flourish. It is hard to imagine any previous president issuing a decree so far removed from scientific advice. President Trump is using the same formula that worked for him in the 2016 election, large and theatrical gestures rather than targeted and efficient ones. Just as building a wall does nothing to tackle the chief source of illegal immigration, visa overstays, so a travel ban aimed at a group of countries with, in many cases, less serious COVID-19 outbreaks than the United States is more symbolic than pragmatic. I will point out, since the publishing of this article, there has been, since the publishing of this article, the European Union criticized Trump's European travel ban, but now has instituted their own. It would seem that you can criticize the president all you want, but other people are starting to agree with him. They say, still, Trump wouldn't be acting this way if it were not popular. In a crisis, people want to pull up drawbridges. It is how our archaic fight or flight response works in modern conditions. As the actual illness, rather than fear of the illness spreads, the moon will harden. Psychologists will have observed that when we are suffering from a cold or flu, we become warier in our outlook and more authoritarian in our politics. Let me just wrap this up, because I think we all get the point. Right now, people are concerned that something that started in China made its way here and is now hurting us. They are concerned that we are not doing enough to protect our communities, and there are many people calling for universal basic income, stipends, stimulus, and even outright universal health care amidst this crisis. As businesses close and the economy grinds to a halt and the markets start taking a major hit, you know what people are going to start saying? Nationalism. They're going to wonder why we have done so much for other people, why we are providing aid to other countries when we are in a crisis. They're going to ask the question I did in the context of this video. Why should we sacrifice in the midst of a global pandemic, but then give healthcare and benefits to people who are not members of our community? As much as we do want to help everyone, as the saying goes, you must secure your own face mask before securing the mask of those sitting next to you. They tell us this every single time we board a flight, of which very few people are even doing right now. While we are facing a drop in air pressure, to use that as a metaphor, then I think it's fair to say the United States needs to now secure its own oxygen mask and stop worrying so much about what it's going to do for other people and do its best to protect its own citizens. Everyone is freaking out, and we are all sacrificing for this. But I do not believe it is fair to ask Americans to sacrifice and then give benefits to people who are not American. I can't tell you what to do, but I can say it really does seem like following this, Americans are going to have it in their minds that globalization has been bad. While there are certainly still going to be many people on the left, we're already seeing the ranks be broken, like I mentioned with Bernie Sanders. He called out China, globalization, manufacturing, yet still wants to maintain his deportation policy. You can see that even Bernie is beginning to have no choice but to say, we must protect America and Americans. I'm not going to tell you what to think, but I will leave it there. Let me know what you think in the comments below. We'll keep that conversation going. Whether or not this is a good idea, we'll find out in November, assuming we get through this quickly. Now, I think it's fair to point out we are going to be fine. We're all sacrificing. Humans are resilient. We've faced much, much worse with much, much less. Technology is particularly great. We have the internet. You're watching me right now. So I think we're going to be all right. Bunker down, have some tacos, watch some TV. We'll make it through this. And hopefully we'll make it through it quickly so we can carry on like normal and get back to normal, have our elections. If you disagree with me, if you agree with Biden and Bernie, then come November, hopefully you have that opportunity. But I think everything's going to carry on like normal. I think a lot of experts are saying that we'll get through this by June. We'll see what happens. Stick around. Next segment will be coming up at youtube.com/TimCastNews at 6 p.m. And I will see you all then.